Welcome. My name is Natasha Sherman, and I am your host. My guest today is Jeffrey Deskovic. He is the executive director of the Jeffrey Deskovic Foundation. This is part 2 of an interview with him, and Jeffrey was wrongfully convicted for rape and murder at the age of 16, sent to prison. After 16 years, he was exonerated, and since then, 2006, he has created the Jeffrey Deskovic Foundation. Welcome.
Thanks for having me.
So I want you to tell me a little bit about the foundation, but first I want to ask you, I want to go back to you came home and all of a sudden a new life is confronting you. You're thrilled to be out, but how do you adjust? You've been 15 years outside of society. What do you do?
Well, it was, I had to learn a lot of technology. And I had to do a lot of work with mental health professionals and help me to cope with the aftermath of having been wrongfully imprisoned. I had to learn a lot of things for the first time. I had never shopped for my own or paid rent. I had to get a driver's license, try to establish credit. There was a lot to it.
Dropped on another planet.
Exactly
or in a different culture.
Yes. Well, yeah, definitely. In fact, I've even said that before in other interviews. It feels like I'm on a different planet.
Does it feel like, does it still chafe or does it feel comfortable at this point?
It feels more comfortable, but at times it doesn't quite feel normal.
Sure. And that may never happen.
Yeah, I think that with, speaking from my own perspective, from my own experience and also from talking with other people who are exonerated, I think that, my symptoms start, on a scale of 1 to 10, 10 being, the highest. I think you can go from a 10 down to a 5. I don't think I'll ever get to 0 or 1.
Right. So, you had some lawsuits. You were wrongfully convicted, and every step along the way, there were things that happened that were not right.
Right.
And people were doing things that were not really legal. They were lying. They were,
withholding information.
Withholding information.
Committing misconduct.
So
exactly.
You then had some lawsuits.
Yes.
And it seems to me that if I remember it correctly, you came away with $8 million. Yes.
Yeah. About that.
Right.
The different parties paid more than that, but as you know, you have to pay the expenses, and then the lawyers take a third. So in reality, you keep 55 to 60%. So, yeah.
So having been in prison, having lost 15, 16 years of your life, it would be easy to go, hey, see you later. I'm out of here, and buy an island, and yet you chose to take 1.6 million of that.
1.5 million.
1.5 and start this foundation.
Yes.
So tell us about the foundation. Why? What are your goals? And what is the status of it?
Sure. Firstly, when I was initially released, it took about 5 years for me to receive any compensation. But during that time period, I was an individual advocate, so I wore different hats. I became a professional speaker. I became a lobbyist, so I lobbied elected officials in New York and Connecticut to pass wrongful conviction prevention measures. I became like a quasi-public persona, doing a lot of television, radio, and print media
If you hadn't done this, would you have been able to find a job?
No, in fact,
even though you were exonerated.
No, I tried to do that. I was always passed over for gainful employment because I didn't have the same level of job experience as other applicants, and the employers seem to always want somebody who could hit the ground running. So I developed this body of work. I got a scholarship from Mercy College, which I used to complete a bachelor's degree. Later, I got a master's from John Jay. And so after about 5 years, I was able to settle with some of the defendants in the lawsuits, as you mentioned, and I wanted to take my advocacy work to the next level. So we wanted to continue. We have 4 prongs. We raise awareness when we seek legislation. So kind of like what I did before, just more of same, but with a support staff. But then most importantly, we have 2 other components, which I could never do on my own. We have the exonerative component, which we try to free people, both in cases with DNA and without. So
the Innocence Project only works with people with DNA.
Yes, exactly, that's only around in 5 to 12% of all serious felony cases.
So you have expanded that into non-DNA cases. Okay.
Yes, Yes, exactly right. And so to carry that out, I have on staff an attorney, an investigator, and a paralegal. And then we also have the reintegrative component, which we try to help people put their lives back together again. So the foundation, we have an apartment that's leased, which we've provided short-term housing for several exonerees who were released and didn't have a place to go.
After that, so you give them a place to stay, but how do you teach them
Right.
to live in society if they have nobody?
Well, we keep regular contact with them to the extent that the employees sometimes have contacts with managers, business owners. If we're able to, sometimes we're able to refer them to places for employment. And then also there's like a type of camaraderie. I mean, which is more, I guess it's a combination of friendship and almost like a sponsor, like in a AA.
Sure.
So I personally spend time with a lot of the exonerees, so they find that as a stabilizing factor. In terms of the status of the organization, so we, I set aside enough money to run the organization for about 3 years. So between now and December, the staff and I were, making our final push to make the organization sustainable. Hopefully, we will be able to do that and keep going. But on the other hand, if we're not, then I'll unfortunately have to close my doors.
And you know what's really, everybody wants to make a difference on some level, I think, or most people do. And we all have different choices, different things that are our kind of resonate for us. I think in this, part of the reason maybe people aren't drawn to it immediately, they're drawn to it, they listen to the stories, but they don't then take the next step,
Right.
is because it hasn't actually, in their mind, touched their world.
Right.
So, if someone has a family member who died of cancer, then that has touched their world. But what people don't realize is it touches our world every day because, we have people running around free who have committed the crimes and continue to commit crimes. Then we have people coming out who have been falsely accused, but now their lives can be a shambles, and they have a hard time integrating into society. And the other thing is it can happen to any of us. If we don't get involved, it could happen to any family member where somewhere along the way, they show up on someone's radar screen and that process starts. So I think part of the equation is really getting people to understand this is not as distant from you as you think it is.
Absolutely correct. And just to drive home the human aspect of it, in the 2 years of my foundation's existence, we've helped exonerate William Lopez, who had been incarcerated wrongfully for 23 and a half years in a non-DNA case out of Brooklyn, New York. His daughter was a year and a half at the time that he was wrongfully convicted, and by the time he emerged back out, she's 25 years old, fully grown, married with her own kids.
Yeah, and how do you do that to another human being?
When you're wrongfully in prison, it's not merely the loss of freedom either. There's, the violence and abuse that goes on while in the prison system. But beyond that, you miss births, deaths, holidays. For me, it was school prom, graduating high school, finishing my education at a normal age.
Did you ever date?
No.
Before you went to prison, you never had a date?
No, I didn't.
How has that impacted you now?
Well, I found it very difficult to approach women that I'm attracted to. I think it's a different set of approach dynamics in different settings. So if you're not quite so sure how to go about it, then half the time you don't, and the other half it doesn't quite go so well. And the other part of that, and this is kind of like the post wrongful conviction stigma,
yes,
is. Okay, you were incarcerated wrongfully for 16 years, but you were still there, so how much of that actually rubbed off on you? So who wants to go out with a guy that spent 16 years in prison?
Yeah.
Is it safe to be alone someplace with you? So that's kind of what, and how do you answer the normal getting to know you questions? Well, what do you do? Well, I run a foundation. That's great. What does it do? And I explained, well, that's even better. Yeah, I read about that last week.
And how come?
Yes.
Okay.
But
well,
now,
that was one of them.
right? And you can the whole the air is sucked out of the room at that point.
It's interesting
the
because
whole thing is different.
I was reading somewhere about somebody talking about having been diagnosed with cancer.
Okay.
People then no longer related to him as the person.
Right.
He was now his disease.
Right.
So people come in and the only conversation and the only thing is you might be somebody who's dying and you have cancer. And whoever he was disappears.
But see, that's exactly what I experienced in those
Yeah.
situations. But then even in terms of being on an advocacy trail, one of the things I've really fought hard to establish is, my credentials as an advocate. Yes, I was wrongfully imprisoned 16 years, and yes, that is what motivates and drives me, but I'm more than that. I understand the
Yes.
issues beyond the lens of my own experience. I do have a master's degree. I did write my thesis on the causes of wrongful conviction and the reforms above and beyond what happened in my case, and I do consider myself to be a professional and an advocate. But to get everyone else to recognize that is not always so easy.
Yeah. And, people are complex. So you have your mission and you have the thing that compels you. But you also like music and you
Yes.
also love sports and you also
Right.
love wrestling,
Yes.
So you're a complex human being, but it gets narrowed down through that kind of myopic lens of prison, wrongfully convicted,
Right.
but still in prison for 15 years. Guess what?
16, but yes.
16, yeah.
Yes, you're
Yeah.
right.
I'm sure it's tough to deal with.
It is. I can't tell you how often, I wish my background was something different so I had different answers to give.
Yeah.
In a minor way, you kind of alluded to it earlier in terms of this, the stigma and mistreatment for people that are incarcerated for sex offenses. One of the ironic things is I remember thinking when I was in prison, gee, I wish I was imprisoned for something other than a sex offense.
Right.
Even though it's a false charge, but
Right.
even to have some charge other than that, just to
Yes.
not have to deal with that, and now just a different version of the same thing, to wish that my background
Yeah.
was
What were you
something.
accused of?
Yeah, exactly. Would that I could be who I am, but just coming at it just from an
Yes.
academic or concerned professional, not
Mm-hmm.
the first person. But then sometimes, not always, the most effective people for change are those who are first person advocates. And so I've I kind of look at what happened to me in a grander scheme
Sure,
of
bigger
things,
picture.
bigger picture. Like,
Yeah.
this is what I'm meant to do in life. This
Right.
is my mission. And so if I can accomplish this, freeing people and preventing them from happening to them and helping them reintegrate all facets of this, then that can be my silver lining, which
Yeah.
I take some meaning out
Yeah.
of.
So let's talk about tips and tools. What should people know?
Yes. People should be aware of what the real state of the criminal justice system is, what the systemic deficiencies are that lead to wrongful convictions, and, more importantly, what can be done to prevent them. To go over a few of those. We covered coerced false confessions. We didn't mention what the reforms are there. So to slow down the rate of wrongful convictions caused by false confessions, we have the reforms of videotaping interrogations from beginning to end.
So do they do that now? Are they compelled to do that
Well,
in New York State?
No, they don't do that in New York State. Certain jurisdictions are voluntarily doing it, but it's not mandatory. Then we need better identification procedures, because misidentification is the leading cause of wrongful convictions in 75% of the 332 DNA-proven wrongful convictions. We need to have a...
So this is partly witnesses and then witnesses who later recant, and yet that's ignored?
Yeah, that and the identification procedures, whether you're talking about a photo array or a lineup, they aren't doing the best practices. And so you have things like people unduly sticking out, you have intentional bias or even unintentional, which is why the double-blind method should be utilized. Sequential viewing, looking at one person at a time, ruling them in or out based on memory, rather than doing a comparative who looks closest to what our memories were. So that's another example. Having a standardized evidence preservation system. We talked before that DNA is only present in 5 to 12% of all serious felony cases, but within that realm where testing is even a possibility, the first hurdle that someone has to jump through, if you're lucky enough to be in that category, is whether the evidence has been lost or destroyed. So that's another thing. Having a better system of public defense. So some of the...
And what would that look like? And you know something, it's interesting because all of this is going to take a while to build, and it's challenging,
Yes.
and there are a lot of obstacles and hurdles. On a practical, if you're arrested, What would you tell somebody the minute you're arrested?
The minute you're arrested, you should insist on a lawyer and do not speak to the police until they provide you with the lawyer. That will level the playing field. There will be no coercion.
Even if you're a kid?
Even if you're a kid, even if you're innocent. You know, that's an ironic thing that false confession experts have determined through their studies, is that the innocence of a suspect actually works against them because they think, well, I haven't done anything wrong, so why shouldn't I talk to the police? What can possibly happen? But I can possibly happen.
Yes. Yeah. So that's good. So anybody, no matter how old you are, if you get arrested, you ask for a lawyer and you ask for your parents, yes? If you're young?
Yeah, but the lawyer is more important because we found in some instances, well, I'm not a false confession expert, I've studied it, but I'm not on that.
Right.
Right, but the parents sometimes can be co-opted by the authorities, by the police, and turned into their agent. Well, come on, Johnny. I mean, if they have you here and they're doing all this, you just tell them the truth. Come on, just tell them we can go home afterwards, and this will all be, this will be understandable. And
So the parents should know as well.
They should know as well. Yeah.
Okay, so now let's get back to public defender, because a lot of people end up with a public defender.
Yes.
And clearly, they're not operating always in your best interest.
Right.
Okay, they're operating a system rather than...
Right, exactly.
Okay, so then what should you be asking for? What should you watch out for? And do we have any way out?
Yes, a cautious yes. Okay, so I'm going to give practical advice if you're in that situation, and then I'll talk about the broader systemic reform. All right, so on a practical level, what you should do as a defendant is you should stay on top of your lawyer. Keep track whatever research they're going to do, whatever witnesses they're going to talk about. Are they actually doing them? So check back with them, find out, and insist. What is your strategy? How are we going to deal with this witness and that witness?
And never accept trust me. Never
accept trust me. No, it should be okay. I trust you, but show me. Okay, so that's very important. I think it's important to be proactive in one's defense. Mm-hmm. Okay, now in terms of systemic, what a really good public defender system should look like is that there should be one statewide system. So that would enable there to be quality control and oversight. It would prevent, because in rural areas, as bad as the public defender system is in general, in rural areas the resources are even more scant. So a statewide system would prevent that. It would enable there to be a body that promulgates standards. Okay, so there's that part of it. And so also that those lawyers who have been found to have rendered ineffective representation won't be in position to do that again.
Good.
And then...
being held accountable.
Right. And then some of the institutional handicaps that are inherent within the public defense system need to be addressed. For example, we need to reduce caseloads. Like in the Bronx, for example, it's not unusual for one public defender to represent more than 100 clients. Think about that for a minute. Now, if you've been to college... Okay, imagine carrying 10 classes at once. I mean, how could you possibly do your best work? Now, say 100 and now it's not a grade, it's someone's freedom. So that, putting an even playing field so that there's equal manpower resources for investigation and experts between a public defender and the prosecution. Equal pay for both sides, so the best legal talent doesn't go to one side or into public or into private practice, then putting them beyond the reach of most people.
So what is it going to take to make that happen? Because, again, unless your feet are being held to the fire, mostly people operate in the default position.
Yes.
Okay? So where are their feet being held to the fire?
I think, well, in order to accomplish this goal, I think that firstly we need to continue to raise public awareness, hence media interviews and public events. But then also I think that we need to encourage the populace as they learn about these systemic deficiencies and what the horrible impacts of them is. They need to contact their local elected officials, their statewide senators and assembly people, and also the federal representatives. We need legislation. So as long as the politicians think that the status quo is acceptable to all of us, nothing's going to change. So that's essential. So we need to
raise your voice.
Raise your voice. And then we need to educate the elected officials also. And when there's wrongful conviction events, we need people to come out, show up. When there are entities such as my foundation, but other organizations as well, we need to support those. The president, regardless of his politics, not here to comment on that one way or the other, but he raised $100 million with donations ranging mostly from the $10 to $100 range. So we need to get behind these because the bottom line is it takes money to do these cases, to hire the staff and do all the work necessary to exonerate people.
And if your doors close in December,
Yes.
we're back to the few organizations that exist.
That will only do DNA cases.
Right. And then there is no real venue for other people.
Yeah, I would accept. There's a few other places, not very many, but that's where we're back to. Yeah, unfortunately.
So what would you do
What would I
if
individually?
your door is closed?
I still have intentions of going to law school next September,
Mm-hmm.
and so when I finish with that, I think that I would like to. My second act, I guess, would be I'd like to run for public office where I can try to address the problem that way. But really, it's not the same because it wouldn't have the same
Sure.
exonerative component. And really, I intended for this to be my legacy, which far outlived me, and it would be really hard for me.
Sure.
So it would be really hard for me if that happened. I mean, I would still do some individual advocacy work, but again, I mean, the cases, I mean, some of the cases were so close to exonerating people. We're just like a half step away from being in position to sit down with different district attorneys or even present in court and just use the adversarial process. So, I stay awake at night thinking about what's going to happen with those cases. Because I know no one's going to take them over. I can delude myself and say that they will, but I know that they won't.
Yeah. It's a tough thing to have to take a look at and think that it's a possibility. So what is it that, again, you're looking for people to donate some small amount of money or some organization or...
So I'm looking for small donors. I'm looking for mid-sized and large donors. I'm looking for board members. I'm looking for celebrities, whether that's an athlete or an actor or somebody with a voice to throw some support, an ambassador, try to attract more attention to the organization. Maybe sometimes large companies they have a philanthropical aspect of it. So maybe if you're an employee there, you could suggest that entity take a look at us to potentially be a recipient of funding. So those things, and then I think that there's also a space for what's called in-kind contributions, so services which have a certain amount of value, which could further the mission that we're doing.
Like what?
Well, for example, public relations things with web development, social media. Those are some things. Definitely exposure and awareness. So if you're working at or have access to people who are in the media, non-traditional media, traditional media, the blogosphere, wherever. So opportunities to make further appearances, so to speak, of one kind or another, would also be helpful.
So there are a lot of different things. It doesn't just have to be money.
No, it doesn't. But
Right.
that is an important part of it,
Of
because
course.
at the end of the day, I mean, the employees, they're not. They still have to pay their bills, and they
Yes.
can't afford to work for free.
Yes,
So
totally get that. So now another thing I want to ask you, you do a monthly radio show with someone called Koji.
yes, I do.
Tell us a little bit about that, because then that's another way for people to tune in to what's happening.
Yes, the show is called I've Been Falsely Accused. We've been doing the show maybe about 6 months to a year. I mean, time has flown by. So I came on. Koji is a radio personality. He has a show called Conversations with Koji, which is on 1230 KLAV, which airs in Las Vegas, but is streamed through the internet. So we have multi-state and even international following. So he had me on his show, which was just Conversations with Koji, and he had other exonerees on there. And then not too long after that, he recontacted me and said, "Look, I want to donate a show a month called was subtitled I've Been Falsely Accused, and I'd like you to be my co-host. I think you add credibility, and I think you can help me get additional guests." So we decided to do the show together once a month, and then he's expanded it now. We do it twice a month. He obviously is in the studio. He has a producer. I call in the show, and we interview guests. We bring in exonerees. We bring in family members. Sometimes we have experts on the field, and most dramatically, sometimes we've had people call on the show from prison, who are
Wow.
fighting to establish their innocence. You can even hear in the background every 15 minutes or so a message flashes, through the screen. This is a call from a state correctional facility. And,
Wow.
Right, but we talked about before the show, the media jumps on. There's all this media attention that comes after people are exonerated, but really you need the help on the front end to get the word out there.
Yeah.
Sometimes the people are trying to secure legal representation. At other times they have legal representation, but are trying to call more attention to their case, because often what happens outside the courtroom can be just as important as what happens in the courtroom.
Right. Wow. So I have one last question to ask you. You went into prison at 16, 17. Your friends visited for a while, and then that stopped.
Very shortly, maybe
So
like 2 years. Yes.
was there anybody who consistently came, or did you ultimately find yourself to be,
Right. Well, the person who came consistently, I would have to say, would have been my mother.
Mm-hmm.
But in the last 5 years, the long trip, kind of wore on. It was like 3.5 to 4.5 hours, and it was expensive to go. And she developed a few health problems with her back and her feet. And so eventually, I was lucky if I saw her once every 6 months.
And you have no siblings?
I have a younger brother. He came to see me 3 times in the 16 years, and not at all in the last decade.
Gosh,
So that's part of the rebuilding, though, is that
Yeah.
I've tried to reestablish family ties, and so I do make the family rounds on holidays just because they're blood. But it's honestly
Again,
it's surface level interaction
Yeah.
is really what it is on a sentimental basis, because really I'm a different person now. They don't fully
Sure.
know who I am as a person. They don't really understand my world, and I try to explain, but it's somewhat beyond their grasp fully.
For me, again, it just
It's very difficult.
highlights the cost,
Human cost,
the
right?
human cost, and the cost in our society of the system running ineffectively, of being wrongfully convicted. It's like everything falls apart.
I would agree, and just to build a different facet of cost, there's other financial implications. The cost of wrongfully incarcerating somebody. The governor in New York, in his State of the State address, said it was $60,000 a year. So now that's being spent to wrongfully imprison somebody. You've removed the taxpayer who should be paying in, and then once they are emerged, they're owed compensation, but that's going to cost the public millions of dollars. And there's all the legal costs along the way, all the court proceedings and lawyers.
Absolutely. So unfortunately, we're at the end of our time. It's been such a pleasure. Thank you so much for being willing to share a very personal, gut-wrenching story, and for the work that you're doing to advocate for others, like making that your mission instead of hiding out. So thank you.
Well, thank you
It's been a
very much
delight.
for having me on your show, and I definitely appreciate your passion and your empathy. They come through loud and clear, and I hope that's
Thank
clear
you.
to all of our viewers.
And I
This was
invite
the most-
everybody.
This was the most heartfelt interview I've ever done.
Thank
from
you.
anybody. Thank you
Thank
very
you.
much.
My name is Natasha Sherman. Thank you for joining us.